similar incidents on the other side. That's already half a win. And the work of the Yugoslavia Tribunal and the Rwanda Tribunal proved beyond any question the terrible crimes that were committed in the 1990s, in the early 1990s and middle 1990s in Bosnia, and in the middle of 1994 in Rwanda. So the false denials, which was so common, particularly in the former Yugoslavia, were really and have effectively been put to an end by the work of these tribunals. And that's one of the huge advantages of any form of justice, of truth-making. The same would apply to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in our own country. The cost. Let me deal with some of the negative aspects. Professor Jarshan has referred to the huge cost of international justice. But justice is expensive. Now, I read some years ago that the cost of the Oklahoma bombing trial in Oklahoma in the United States, not counting the court time, was $160 million. That was the cost of the prosecution and defense. That was for one fairly short trial in the United States. So if one looks at $100 million a year for each of the Yugoslavia and Rwanda tribunals, it's certainly in line and probably cheap in comparison to a high-flying trial like the Oklahoma bombing. But you can't really value justice in terms of dollars or rands. How much was the TRC worth to South Africa? I believe that the TRC stopped denials and fabrication in our own country. You can't put a money value on it, and I think that's an important consideration. Really, the question that all of us must ask ourselves and ask each other: is international justice doing a job that makes us a better world than if it didn't exist? Are we a better world of international justice than we would be without it? Having posed a question, let's look at the International Criminal Court. It's got off to a fairly slow start in comparison to the other tribunals to which I refer. You know, the first indictment against Karadzic and Mladic, which we issued, was 11 months after we began. And people complained, it took you 11 months to indict Karadzic and Mladic, and we got really lousy press as a result of it in many countries. The International Criminal Court took a great deal longer to get out its first indictments. The first trial in the Yugoslavia Tribunal began in 1995, a little more than a year after I arrived there. The first judgments were out in 1996, 2 years after it began work. The first judgment in the ICC, as I mentioned, was issued earlier this year in July. So it has taken time. It's a new institution, lessons have to be learned, prosecutors have to come from many countries, judges from many countries, and I think one must understand the immensity of the task that these tribunals have. In Yugoslavia and Rwanda, we were told what to investigate. Yugoslavia, you investigate war crimes committed in the former Yugoslavia. In Rwanda, you look at war crimes and human rights violations committed in Rwanda. Not easy, but at least we knew what our mandate was, what our brief was. In the International Criminal Court, the chief prosecutor in his office, now I'm happy to say her office, I was the first woman chief prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, from Gambia. There is no such direction. There are, at the moment, 7 situations before the International Criminal Court, and there are another 8 or 9 being investigated on 3 continents. So there's a huge field to look into, and it's a lot more difficult for the prosecutor as a result. I'm sure you're all aware of the complaints in Africa that all 7 situations before the International Criminal Court come from Africa. Before one criticises the court for that, one must know the facts and take them into account. The facts are that of the 7 situations, 3 came from African governments. The Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and the Central African Republic all said to the International Criminal Court, we are asking you to investigate war crimes in our country. That came as a surprise. Nobody thought that the first cases before the International Criminal Court would be referred by the governments of the countries themselves. But you can't blame the prosecutor or the court for those 3 situations coming from African governments themselves. And other African leaders have no right to criticise the court because their colleagues in those 3 countries decided that it was in their interest, in the interest of their countries, that the International Criminal Court should investigate. 2 others came from the Security Council, Libya and Sudan. So again, it wasn't the court taking those situations under its jurisdiction. The Security Council, acting under its powers under the United Nations Charter, said to the International Criminal Court, we are referring these cases to you. Again, a surprise, because none of those of us who supported the court ever imagined that in the present world that the Security Council would refer cases to the International Criminal Court. It was assumed that the United States would veto all references. Certainly in the first term of George W. Bush, the United States was trying to kill off this court. It was poisoned, certainly at the Pentagon, and yet it ended up abstaining in the case of Sudan and voting in favour in the case of Libya. So of the 5 situations, of 5 of the 7, the court didn't initiate them coming before the International Criminal Court. Only in 2 cases has that happened. That's in the case of Kenya. Kenya is a member of the Rome Statute, so the court has jurisdiction, and it was really Kofi Annan who was responsible mainly, as well as some Kenyan politicians, for the referral of the Kenya situation to the International Criminal Court. A Kenyan commission, presided over by Judge Waki, came to the conclusion that the violence that accompanied the 2009 election in Kenya should be investigated in Kenya. And of course it should have. And a resolution came before the Kenyan Parliament to set up a special commission to investigate the violence committed in 2009. Well, I think to their shame, the Kenyan politicians didn't want to be seen to be doing that, and they didn't pitch up when it came to a vote. And there wasn't a quorum in the Kenyan Parliament when that resolution came before. And the result is that no investigation was set afoot in Kenya. And the Waki Commission and Kofi Annan said if the Kenyans don't do it themselves, then the International Criminal Court should step in. So that was the basis on which the prosecutor investigated Kenya, and there are now 6 leading Kenyan politicians who have been indicted, and who, to their credit, I must say, are voluntarily appearing before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. The problem for Kenya is 2 of them are standing for election as president in the coming election, the elections of next year. The 7th situation was the Ivory Coast, where crimes were committed, serious war crimes were committed, and the prosecutor, at the request of leading politicians in the Ivory Coast, got involved. So I understand the sensitivity. I understand African leaders objecting to only African situations before the International Criminal Court. But the way it's happened, I've described, and certainly I will feel happier, as I'm sure many others will be, when non-African situations come before the International Criminal Court. The African Union really only became exercised and started getting into the act of criticising the court when the court issued an arrest warrant for a sitting head of state, President al-Bashir of Sudan. The African Union didn't seem to get too worried when it was people at lower levels. They got worried, I think, when a head of state was indicted and an arrest warrant was issued. So